This conference will now be recorded.
All right. So in yesterday's session, we were talking about, we were just looking at what YAML is, and we were just looking at how do you design pipelines in YAML or how do you write pipelines in YAML. And we just spoke very briefly about what are the advantages of having let's say a YAML pipeline versus something called as a classic editor. And I discussed a couple of problems about, let's say, something like the flexibility of shifting your pipeline, like from one project to the other, or one from one organization to the other, and the ease of interaction with it. And also I also said that Azure is now, or Microsoft is now clearly indicating that they are going to, in future, let's say down the lane somewhere around 5 or 10 years later, they're now going to deprecate, let's say, the classic pipelines. They're going to use YAML pipelines, and a lot of organizations are actually preferring YAML. So let's see the very basics of YAML language. Let's understand what really YAML is, and let's start understanding how to write pipelines with YAML. So this is the agenda for the day. The very first thing that I would start with is just the outline of what the YAML really is, and then later on how do you write pipelines using the YAML language. So in order to start writing YAML, I need a tool. So I will rely back upon VS Code. So I'll be using a tool called VS Code in order to start writing it out. And once it's open, let's go ahead and open or create a new folder. And let's go to, let's say, this folder. And let's say YAML practice 3 or 4. Select this folder. And I'm inside the folder right now. And I now want to start writing YAML files. So YAML again comes like an extension, meaning in order to start writing YAML, you need the extension for YAML. The very first thing that I'll do before writing is go ahead and install the YAML extension. So once you type in YAML YAML, these are the couple of things that I want you all to install. So one thing is this is YAML by Red Hat, which will help you write YAML. The other thing is docs -YAML, which is supported by Microsoft. So in my case, they are installed. In your case, just click on them and you'll have an install button here. Just go ahead and install this out. So the first two extension is what I need to, what I need to basically go ahead and install out. And after that's installed, I just add a file, and I'll just say that it is student details. Okay, I just want to write the details of a couple of students in my class. I want to store it out. So I'll store it out in something called as YAML. The file extension is usually YAML YAML, and you'll get, let's say, something like this. This violet color exclamation out here. It's either YAML, or in short, you can also do YML. Anything is okay. Any kind of an extension is like okay with us. So it's either YAML or it's either YML. Now let's write details of a student. So I have a student detail.yaml file, and automatically my PowerShell console, or sorry, automatically my VS Code console understood that it's a YAML language that I'm writing in. So it says, okay, great, you can go ahead and start writing in YAML. So I would want to write the details of a student, like the name, which class he's into, whether he's attending the class or not, and whether, let's say, a couple of details like that. So let's start with that. And it's always key value pairs in YAML, meaning, for example, I'll say it is name of a student. So I'll just type writing name, I'll give a colon and then a space. This is important, guys. YAML is a language that primarily depends upon the spaces you give. So I'm doing name, and in this place I will write, let's say, something like, and this is the first name, or this is, let's say, the first key value pair that I went ahead and wrote in a YAML language. And let's say class, and I want to declare that this particular person called Kiran is in a class called DevOps, and I want to write the time. and I'll say it is 8. Now, this is a representation of a string. And if I put a hash, it means that I'm commenting something. It's a string. You don't have to pass it in quotes. You can also pass it in quotes. There is no issue if you do pass it in quotes. Quotes are also allowed. You can also pass strings in quote. This is a representation of an integer. So YAML supports the string, YAML supports the integer, and etc. And finally, if I say I'll just give a key value pair called attending, and I want to say whether this particular person is attending the class regularly or not, I will say true, and the color automatically changed. This is a Boolean value. True or false is also supported in this YAML particular format, and you can say this is Boolean, just true or false in this way. Now imagine if I were to write the same, let's say, key value pair. I want to save the same name of the student. I want to save the details of the same student in a JSON. So I would say it is student details dot JSON, and in the JSON syntax, I'll need to start with open and close parenthesis, open and close slow brackets. Then I start, let's say, with something like name, and then I would say it is Kiran, and I need to declare it in this way, guys. The thing here is that if I say it is class, and if I say it is DevOps, the value pair will now throw me an error telling that, you know what, there is a problem. You did not pass code, so I don't understand whether what kind of a value this is. So you'll definitely need to pass this out. You'll definitely need to pass this, and then you need to have a comma after, let's say, the end of a statement. Then I would say something like timings or time, and I can just say 8. This also supports integers in this way, and you can say attending, and I'll say true. So this also supports, let's say, Boolean values. Now, this is how YAML and this is how, let's say, JSON differ in meaning. The syntaxing, let's compare this out. Let's say compare the the syntaxing, which is very clean here, meaning this is the most cleanest language that is easier to understand by, let's say, a human being. This is more, let's say, a serialization language, which is in a very raw format, and the machine can easily understand this. But as a human being, if I want to interpret it, as a human being, if I want to go ahead and, let's say, understand this language, it becomes slightly tricky, especially when you have, let's say, multiple things out there, meaning when you have multiple details to be stored, which we will see, let's say, in the preceding sections. If there is single detail, I'm saying, okay, fine, this is Kiran, this is DevOps, okay, fine, this is grade, so time and all that stuff. I'm able to store all these values, but I am adhering to the syntax. I am making sure that there is a syntax basically that I'm following. There's a comma, there is, let's say, quotes and etc. But YAML doesn't offer that. YAML says, okay, fine, you know what, declare it the way you want. I'm okay with it until and unless you stick to the spaces. If you look at this, I made sure there is a space between the colon and between the character. Meaning, if I remove this out, if I place this and remove this out, it will start throwing errors. The entire YAML key value pair is basically uh, developed on the cornerstone of spaces out here. Spaces and indentations is what we call here. So the entire YAML format depends upon the spaces. So this is something that we need to make sure to take care of. And let's say, let's close this. Let's say if I want to write multiple students in, or let's say I have multiple students in my class. This is not the only student that I have, and I want to store all those student details, let's say, in JSON. So in JSON, if I want to store, let's say, a student detail, I need to write an array. So how do I again declare an array? So I go here, I'll say something like student details and open up, let's say, something like a square bracket that this is an array declaration. Then open up an object, then take all this key value pair and place it here. Again, syntax is very important in JSON. So let me format this out. This is how the first student detail looks like. And I want to go ahead and add one more student detail out here. Like let's say this is Suresh and this is admin 9 a.m. and let's say this is false. And I also want to basically go ahead and within Suresh, I also want to add some more details like house number and etc. So I will say house details. I'll say house details, something like this. I'll open up another array inside which I can say something like house number and I can say 27, something like this. You can give house number like 27-1-0 something like this. You can say street, the second street and etc. I'll say city and all that stuff. So very importantly, I can open up multiple arrays in JSON. Then how will I do the same thing with let's say YAML? How will I basically make sure to have this kind of a body in YAML? In YAML, it's pretty simple. I have a student details here, so I'll come here. I'll do an enter. Go to the first or second line, anything is okay. And I will say student details. And what I'm going to do is I'll select all these things out and I'll do a tab, meaning I'm doing an indentation out here and I need to get everything under one line. So now I'm saying it is student details. And as and when I give, let's say something like a hyphen here and do a space here, it's now considering that the student details is an array and I can collapse it. All the details are now inside the student details. So for example, if I do, if I collapse this out here, it's telling that, okay, fine, student details is now an array. I can do the same thing here also. I can collapse it and everything gets summed up inside the student detail, which it's now considering this to be an array. So if I now want to enter another name of a student, I have to start with a hyphen and the hyphen has to be in the same line as this hyphen is. So it has to be in the same line. I'll again say name and I'll say something like Suresh and I'll say this is class. I'll say admin. I'll say something like time. I'll say 9. I'll say attending. I'll say false, not attending regularly. And then I'll say house details. And house details again is an array. So I will be doing something like a tab. So indenting into it and then say house number. Then something like 27. Let's do a string here. So I'll say this 27-1-0 and say street 2 and let's say something like city and say HYD Hyderabad. So this student details right now consists of these two values and these are represented by the list. And inside the house details is another array. And imagine Suresh has another house. We can also basically have those details as well, like something like house details, house number, and etc. So I can declare multiple things inside this particular quotation. And if I now do a comparison, now this is how big, let's say, or this is how complex a simple data in JSON is looking as. So I have the name student inside the student details. I have all these things, etc. So on and so forth. And this is how plain or this is how simple all these details are now looking at, let's say in JSON, sorry, in YAML. So this is the comparison between JSON and YAML, wherein YAML is not that heavily syntaxed, meaning you still have a bit of syntaxes. You still need to make sure that you're giving the right spaces. You're giving, let's say, you're making sure that the spaces are right and etc. This is something that you have to take care of. But this is one of the most cleanest languages like that you can write, that you can go ahead and play around with less to worry about all this brackets, all this commas and etc. And each and everything has its own advantages and disadvantages. So just comparing the JSON and the YAML syntaxes out here so that you all can understand what we're getting into. Any questions till here, guys? Anyone, anything till here? And are you all following this? Yes, no, maybe.
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, yes. Follow me.
Okay. So with this little knowledge about YAML, like how do you write YAML, let's start understanding how I can go ahead and write this, or how I can go ahead and use this knowledge to write a pipeline in Azure DevOps. Meaning now I'm talking about writing a pipeline, which is called pipeline as code. YAML is also called as pipeline as code. So I now need to understand how should I write my pipeline. So I'll go here. This is the project that I have, and this is the first repository that we did have, which is something like which has something like the .NET Core application and the .NET Full Framework. I'll be just focusing upon the .NET Core application for now, and we had a build pipeline for this. So let me open that build pipeline. So this is the .NET Core build pipeline that I did have, and if I edit this pipeline, this is all what I have. I have a .NET Restore. You of course can have a Sonar, but let's keep a build pipeline very simple. And I have a .NET build, .NET publish, and the publish artifact. And I have a couple of variables. Like let's say one of the main variable that I'm looking at is a build configuration and the build platform. All these things out here, which is like the main variables that I'm actually interested into. And I have all these tasks here. One thing that you can straight away do, one thing that Azure or one thing that DevOps gives you an ability to straight away do is that you can just click on this pipeline. You can click on this button and say export to YAML. You can directly get the YAML definition of the pipeline, and you can just open this out, and it looks something like this. It says triggers, variables, and all that stuff, and it says path filters, include, exclude. You have a lot of things out here, and this sometimes becomes a little bit overwhelming because when you look at this, the pipeline looks a bit scary. But let's try to do this in a little bit way. I mean, let's try to do this in the most simplest way that is available. So I'll just click on the edit. I just want to see what is the definition for this particular pipeline looks like, how the definition for this pipeline looks like. And now I'll open, or I'll now create new pipeline out of this repository, and I'll say new pipeline. And instead of using this called use classic editor to create the pipeline without YAML, I will now go for this option called Azure Repos Kit. This is where my code is, and I want to write. I want to start writing something known as a YAML pipeline. So I'll just say click on this one, and this is the first repository that I do have, and I will say a starter pipeline, meaning I want to write it from the scratch, and it just gives me a bare basic definition telling me that you know what, great, this is how you need to start with YAML. And it says okay fine, there is a trigger, there's a pool, and it says steps and etc. Now before starting to write YAML, or before starting to write let's say the pipeline using Azure DevOps YAML, I will just have a look at the documentation out here. This is what is the documentation that I will basically really rely upon in to help me not to write this pipeline, in order to help me basically design a YAML pipeline. And I posted the link across in the chat. And if I just scroll down, this is the image that I'm actually looking at. YAML pipelines start with something known as trigger. Then you have something called as a stage. Inside a stage, you have something called as a job. inside a job you have something known as steps, and each and every step is something like a step or a task. You can loosely call it tasks and etc. Meaning, if I were to do a comparison with my classic build pipeline, this is the stage. This is called as a stage where I'm declaring things like what is the agent job and all that stuff. Then I have something known as the job, wherein I'm saying, okay, fine, this is the code building phase, wherein I'm building the code. And inside the job is something where I have something called as steps. This is step one, step two, step three, so on and so forth. Or I would say steps, and then I would say this is task one, task one, task two, task three, and so on and so forth. Meaning, this is the syntax what Azure DevOps, or this is the syntax what Microsoft documentation is actually recommending. It's trigger and then stage and then say all these things out. So in order to start with this, I will first remove all these things out, and it has something called as a trigger, and it says trigger is main, but I want this to be, let's say, a manual pipeline. So I'll say trigger is none. So I'm telling trigger is none. I'm adding a key value pair called trigger none, just like the way I did add a student detail called student detail called name and then Kiran. After this, it says you mention the trigger. Now you mention something known as a stage. So I will say stage. There is something known as stages, and in here I'll say stage, and I will say this is a code build stage. Say code building. I'm just calling the name, or I'm just giving a name to my stage called as code building out here. Just do an enter and just do an indentation. Come below stage, and I will say the display name. I'll just give a display name to the stage called build, and I can now give something known as a variable. So I'll tell that okay, fine, for this stage to build successfully, there are two variables called build configuration, which is release, build platform, which is any CPU. These are the two things that I actually need. So I'll come here inside this, do an indentation because there are multiple variables out here that I can declare. And in here, I can say this is configuration, and I'll say it is a release. This is the first key value pair I'm declaring inside the variables. And then I have a build platform, which is any CPU. Say any CPU. These are the two variables. If I collapse it, this is under the variable and this is under the stage. This is a proper alignment of my entire template out here. So this is my stage wherein I'm declaring, let's say, what is the build pipeline, or what is, let's say, things like the display name of the stage. What are the variables that I need to use for the stage and etc. This is something that I declared. So this is the first stage that I'm creating. And this is a code build stage. I'm just building my code here. And after that's complete, now I am just doing a control space in order to load all the suggestions that I have. So I am coming under the stage. So I'm coming under the stage. So stage, display name, variables all are in the same line. In the same way, I'm just coming here, putting my cursor in the same line where all these things are. And I'm doing a control and space. And it says jobs and etc. So this is what I need. Under a stage, I can have multiple jobs. Under each job, I need to mention what are the tasks or what are the steps here. So I'm coming here and I'll say job, and I'll say enter this out, and then now give all my conditions out here. I'll say this is a build job, and very importantly, for a job, you need to declare something called as a pool. You need to declare something known as an agent pool, or you need to make sure that you run a job on an agent because a job has a task and everything. So I will say that okay, fine, just come down here and I will now say pool. So I'm telling okay fine pool, and I'm telling in the pool I'm coming inside the pool, giving an indentation out here, meaning I'm declaring a child item for the pool, and I'll say VM image, and I'll say Windows latest. It's just coming here. It's just like coming here and declaring that okay fine, I want an agent pool called Azure Pipelines, and I want an agent called Windows latest. This is what I'm doing here. So I'm coming inside the job, and I'm saying this is the pool, or this is the name of the pool that I actually want, and then I can basically go ahead and now mention my steps. This is where I am. So I'm done with my job. I just gave the display name, etc. Now I'm coming down to my steps. I'm saying steps, and inside the steps is where I need to mention what I need to do, like the .NET Restore, like the .NET Build, Publish, and Publish artifact. These are the couple of things that I need to do inside the steps. So inside the step is where I'm going ahead and saying, okay, fine, I need all these steps to be mentioned in the form of something called as tasks. So what I'll do is I'll just remove this indentation. I'll place my cursor here, and instead of writing all these steps, which becomes a little bit redundant and a little bit, let's say, a little bit trickier, in, in order to avoid writing it, I'll say there's an option called show assistant here. There's this option called show assistant. So what I'll do, I'll click on this and tell show assistant, and I'll say .NET Core. And the first task that I want to do is a .NET Restore, and I'll just go refer to my particular task, and this is the path to restore the projects. So I'm just taking this out, pasting it in. There are no arguments whatsoever, and then there is feeds that I select here. So the feeds that I select here, and I'm using the NuGet. I'm using, let's say, the packages from NuGet.org, and I'll say add. I now added a task called .NET Restore, and then I just gave in all the parameters what was there in my particular task here. So whatever the parameters were there in my particular task here, just went ahead and added them. And I'll also add one more key value pair here called display name, and I'll say this is .NET Restore, just for me to understand. Just when I trigger with pipeline, for me to understand what I'm doing, I'm just saying this is .NET Restore out here. This is the first thing that I'm adding. So it's a .NET Restoration. And after adding this, I'm doing an enter, and I'm doing a backspace. So I'm coming under the tasks. This is what I'm doing. I'm placing the cursor under the same line where I started the task, and then I'll start adding one more task which is called .NET Build, because after the restore is where I started with build, and I am building this particular path, and there is some argument called configuration, meaning I'm building this code in a configuration called release configuration, and the variable has been declared here. Build configuration is release. So I'll just put my cursor back here, and I'll say this is build, and this is the path to the project. And in the argument section, I'll just go ahead and take this argument called hyphen hyphen configuration, place it in, and say add. Now I'm doing a second task wherein I am going ahead and building my pipeline. I'm building my code. The first thing was restore, second thing was build. So I'll say this is the display name called .NET Build. And finally, there is something, or there are two more tasks which is called .NET Publish. And in publish, this is, let's say, the definition that I wanted to use. So I'll say, I'll again put my cursor back under the tasks. I want to make sure that it's falling under the tasks here. Say .NET Core, and I'll say this is publish. And I will give the path to the project. I'm just giving the name of the solution file, and whatever arguments were there in my classic pipeline, I'm just taking this and pasting it out here. So I will start always with the classic pipeline to understand what is the definition going to be, and then start adding my tasks. So once I added this out, Again, I'll just add a key value pair called display name, and I'll say this is .NET Publish. This is the .NET Publishing task that I went ahead and added, and when enter, the cursor is here. Again, collapse it out. Make sure that the cursor is there in the same line as the task. So this is where your cursor should be. This is very important because indentations is something which plays a very key role in, let's say, writing your YAML code. Finally, I will say publish build artifact. This is what I want to do. I'll say this is this path, and this is the location. I'll say add it out, and I'll just give a display name to it. I'll say display name is publish artifacts. Finally, I'll change the name of my pipeline to, let's say, something like .NET Core.yaml. This is the name of the pipeline that I want to change, and I will say save, and I will say run, and I'm saving this out to, let's say, I just want this file, let's say, in the main pipeline or in the main, or let's say I can also go ahead and save it where my code is. So let me see where the code is. Say leave. Let me see where the code really is. So all the code is in develop branch, and in the main branch there is nothing really. It's just an empty file here. But here I do not get that option, so I'll just create a new branch here, and I'll say this is adding a .NET or adding a YAML file, and it's now saying it's based on the main branch because this is how it'll kind of work. So I'll say save and run, and this is bound to fail because there is no code in the main branch at all. And let me look at the branches right now. This is the Azure pipeline branch that I have, and this is the .NET Core pipeline that I do have. So make sure to just take this out, do a copy, and I'll just go into my branches. And for now, I'll just disable all this branch policies because I need to approve it and do a lot of stuff. So I'll just disable all these things out. Validator is also disabled, so this one is also disabled. Let me off this out, and let me just do a refresh. It still has branch policies. Let's see, why does it have branch policies? Okay, let's see branches, and yeah, branch policy is disabled. There's no branch policy here, and I will now just go ahead and add a simple file here, and I'll say this is .NET Core.yml. Place everything that I copied from that particular file. Just say commit, and I just added the .NET YAML to the develop, and now you can just go to the pipeline, and this is the failed pipeline, so I can just ignore it out. I'll say new pipeline. I'll say Azure Repos Git. I'll say this is the first repository, and I'll say existing Azure YAML pipeline. So instead of saying startup pipeline, I'll say existing Azure pipeline YAML. I'll say this is develop branch, and just click on this particular path. I'll say continue, and I'll say run. So I'm now running my pipeline out of the develop branch, and it's now starting the build job right now. So I have the pipeline, I'm running this out, and this pipeline is now being run out from the develop branch. So I'm just using the entire pipeline definition, did not save it on the main because there is no code in the main branch at all. And now I am just taking all the definition, putting it inside the develop branch, and then I created a pipeline out of that particular file right now. So now it's doing the same thing what we did using the classic. It's doing a restore, it's doing a build, it's doing a publish, and finally it will publish the artifacts also. But this time around, we are trying to do it with a YAML rather than, let's say, something like a classic editor. and it'll take like about a minute to go ahead and do this out. And this is done. And let me do one more thing is that I'll say edit pipeline, and let's see. Okay, this is all good. I'll just try to edit the name of this pipeline here. I'll say rename or move the pipeline, and I'll just rename the pipeline to YAML.NET pipeline. And I'll just save this out so that the pipeline name is changed, and I can get rid of this particular pipeline. I don't need this. I can just delete this out. Just deleting it out, and then I have a YAML.NET pipeline out here. And one of the best things of this is that this file is now version controlled, meaning the history is being tracked on this file. And if your branch has policies, meaning you will definitely have policies, or you will definitely do have all the policies on the developed branch, isn't it? So if your branch now has policies out there, even for me to make a change on the pipeline, even for me to make a change on this particular pipeline definition, I need to go ahead with the right approval channel. I need to go ahead with all the, let's say, the sonar validations and etc. And only then my change will go in. Unlike, let's say, our classic pipeline, what used to happen in our classic pipeline is that I could just come here. Sorry, not this one. So I could just come here and I could just go like a DevOps engineer and with, let's say, at least a contributor access, and I can just go and do whatever edit that I need. I could have just gone ahead and edited it the way I want and I could have saved it out. Of course, the history is tracked, but this is not really efficient. This is not really efficient in, let's say, doing a version control. Now what's happening is that my entire pipeline right now is saved like just any other file. Now this is a file which is now being tracked by Git, meaning you can now work with this offline. You can make sure to you commit it on your local. You can do all the push pull sync operations on this particular file, and it's portable. Meaning if I just want to write the same pipeline, meaning if I just want to write the same pipeline in a different project, or let's say in a different, let's say I in a different organization altogether, all I need to do is just go there. I'll just say pipeline. I'll just say basically take a repository, place the pipeline here, and then create a new pipeline from it. That's it. Or place the file here and create a new pipeline from it. It's that simple for migration. So I can just do that. So let's see if I have a YAML. So I have a YAML file already, and I'll just say add a new file. I'll say YAML demo. Cancel this out. Let me give an extension properly. I'll say new file. I'll say files, and I'll say YAML demo. YML. So I'll just basically I'm just adding this out here, and I can now just go ahead and create a pipeline right away. I can say pipeline, I can say new pipeline, and I can say YAML. Just select the repository called YAML here, and I can start creating a pipeline right away from this one. So from the YAML, I can just say continue, and I can now start creating the entire pipeline as such. So there is nothing which is stopping me to just go ahead and do a migration. It's as simple. So with one file, it's very easy for you to just migrate your pipelines. Just make sure that you replicate your pipelines across, and it is really simple for, let's say, the portability option. Whereas when you want to port, let's say, a build pipeline that is, let's say, designed in classic, you need to convert it into a JSON as we did yesterday, and it will be very tricky for us to go ahead and, let's say, change this entire build definition, work on this, and etc. So YAML makes it a bit more easier to go ahead and work. And very importantly, you need a bit of hands-on on YAML, guys. This is something that I would suggest, because a lot of companies are now moving towards YAML. A lot of companies are now telling that, okay, fine, we need knowledge on YAML pipelines. But in order to understand YAML, you first need to understand what is classic, how do you design a pipeline, and from there you can just go ahead and let's say write your own pipeline. And again, you can just go to an existing pipeline. For example, I'll just go to an existing pipeline here, and you can easily convert the pipeline into a YAML definition. Meaning this is let's say an existing pipeline. I can just click on this. I'll just click on these three dots and I'll say export to YAML. It's really easy to just go ahead and convert this pipeline into a YAML definition, and this becomes a pretty easy tool. And this is how the YAML definition looks like. It says what is the name of the pipeline and all that stuff. So it's pretty easier for you to just go ahead and do that in a YAML definition also. Even this is possible. You can write your entire sonar configuration and all these things are embedded into it. You can write this too, but it's always better to start from a scratch when you're learning this out. Any questions till here, guys? Anyone, anything till here? Guys, are you following this? Yes, no, maybe.
Yes.
Yes.
Any question? Any questions, guys?
No.
Okay. So I also want to go ahead and add one more thing into my pipeline. I just want to go ahead and add, let's say, the ARM template, because as of now, my pipeline right now is just going ahead and building the code. So if I look at my pipeline, it's going ahead and producing, it's going ahead and producing the artifact, and it says it's a .zip. This is a .NET Core application. It says a .zip, great. But I also need the infrastructure files to be in place. So yesterday we did this, right? So let me go to the ARM repository, just copy this infra, like this is the ARM web app, wherein I just went ahead and I was just playing around with a web application. So I'll just copy this out. I'll just copy my entire template, go into let's say the first repository, into the develop branch, and I'll say new folder. I'll again say infra. You can say arm.json, or let's say webapp.json to be more precise. So I have a very simple template, pasting it out here. So I did not just create this template again. So I'm just pasting the existing template out here. You can just create it and let's say use that particular template. So I have my template, I pasted it out here. The next thing that I'm going to do is that I'll just go into my pipeline called the YAML first, the YAML.NET pipeline out here. And I also want to make sure to copy this template, meaning I want to make sure to go ahead and do a copy here. So I'll just go here before let's say the publish artifacts. This is the last step, before which I'll put my cursor under the same tasks. Make sure my cursor is here. I'll say copy files, and I'll use the source folder called infra, because this is where my code is sitting in, or this is where my uh, the JSON file is actually sitting in, which is called infrastructure out here. So I'll just say infra, and I'll say every file which starts with .json, and I'll say the target folder is nothing but the build.artifact staging directory. I'll say this build.artifacts staging directory, and I'll say add. So I'm now copying all my infrastructure files as well. So I could have added I can just go ahead and add this task also. And I'll say copy ARM. This is the name of the task I want to give. And just want to check that I've given the right name for the artifact staging directory. Okay, I did. And I can just say save and just add a comment that, okay, fine, this is the staging directory out here. I'll do a save here and I can just run this out. So I'm now running my pipeline with an additional task, which will just go ahead and copy all the infrastructure files, meaning all the ARM templates that I have. So whatever I was doing with a classic pipeline, meaning adding a copy files task and making sure that they get reflected in the artifact staging directory, I'm just making sure to do the same thing with YAML right now. So I now have another task called copy ARM, wherein I want to just go ahead and produce all these files. So it's doing the same thing what I did with the classic, but with an additional task right now called copy ARM, which will just go ahead and copy my ARM templates out here. So this is what I'm doing. So let's wait for a second for the pipeline to finish its run. So in the copy ARM, it said, okay, fine, I found one file, uploaded it out. And if I now go ahead and look into the artifact, I have these two artifacts getting reflected in the build.artifact staging directory. So this is how simple. So I went ahead and added this out. So the only challenging part that you need to start with is the documentation. You need to understand the syntax. You need to understand the structure of the pipeline, and you can just go ahead and design the pipeline. And once you have a base pipeline, right, you can just go ahead and edit it multiple times. This now all makes sense that, okay, fine, this is how the pipeline looks like. And I have pasted this pipeline here in let's say our open repository. You can basically go inside this repository and look at this pipeline for your, let's say, for the ease of your understanding. When you are writing a pipeline, you can just have this as you have this by the side, and you can see how I have written the definition, and you can just go ahead and write your own definition. And also add the copy task here. This is something that I missed on. So let me add this out. So you can just go ahead and view this definition, and you can start, let's say, working on this definition. And on Monday, when we meet again, once you are a bit okay with this, we'll go ahead and see how you can create multi-stage pipelines in YAML. This is a single stage pipeline. I just have one stage. Can I also go ahead and do a deployment using YAML? Definitely yes, that's what we want to achieve. So I want to make sure that we go towards something called as a multi-stage YAML pipelines. And with Monday, we'll be finishing out YAML, meaning we'll do a multi-stage pipeline. We'll understand how to do that. And from Tuesday, we will be starting with Terraform. So this is the plan that I do have, guys. Any questions there? Anyone, anything? Any questions, guys? Anyone, any questions? Okay, if there are no further questions, then we're good to close this, guys. Please take this video and please try to start working on YAML. Please just have a basic understanding of YAML, like know how do you write the syntax of YAML, and from there you can start writing your pipelines. From there you can now start writing your pipelines instead of designing the pipeline. This is what you could do. Okay, guys. So have a great day ahead then, and we'll meet on Monday. Thank you.